Marcus Rivera stared at the rusted hulk of metal sitting in the desert salvage yard, wondering if he'd finally lost his mind. The skeletal remains of what had once been a private jet stretched before him like the carcass of some prehistoric bird, its wings bent at unnatural angles, cockpit windows spiderwebbed with cracks that caught the Arizona sun like fractured diamonds. $500. His last $500. The money that was supposed to buy groceries for the next 2 weeks, pay for Isabella's medication refills, keep the lights on in their cramped apartment for another month. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The salvage yard owner, a weathered man named Dutch, whose hands were permanently stained with motor oil, kicked at a piece of debris with his steel-toed boot. Most folks see junk when they look at her, he said, his voice gravelly from decades of cigarettes and desert dust. But sometimes junk holds surprises. Sometimes what looks worthless on the outside contains something precious on the inside. You just gotta be willing to dig for it. Marcus felt the weight of desperation pressing against his chest like a physical force. 3 months ago, he'd been a certified aircraft mechanic at Phoenix Sky Harbor, pulling in decent money, providing for his 8-year-old daughter Isabella with the steady reliability that had defined his entire adult life. Then the layoffs came. Budget cuts, they called it. Downsizing, corporate restructuring. Pretty words that meant the same thing. Good people losing their jobs, while executives received bonuses for making tough decisions. The unemployment benefits had run out 6 weeks ago. His savings account, never robust to begin with, had been drained by Isabella's mounting medical expenses. Juvenile diabetes wasn't a death sentence in the modern world, but it was expensive. Insulin, test strips, continuous glucose monitors, endocrinologist appointments, the endless parade of costs that came with keeping his daughter healthy and alive. The state insurance covered the basics, but basics weren't enough when your child's life depended on the latest technology and the most effective treatments. The idea had come to him during one of those sleepless nights when worry gnawed at his consciousness like a persistent hunger. Aircraft salvage. He knew planes inside and out, understood their systems, their components, their hidden value. While other people saw twisted metal and broken dreams, Marcus could identify salvageable parts, valuable materials, components that could be refurbished and resold. It was a gamble, certainly, a desperate man's last resort, but it was also the only plan he had left. Isabella had been skeptical when he'd explained his idea over their breakfast of generic cereal and powdered milk. Her dark eyes, so much like her mother's, had studied his face with the unsettling wisdom that children developed when they grew up too fast, when circumstances forced them to understand adult worries before they should. "Daddy," she'd said, her voice carrying that particular tone children used when they were trying to be brave for their parents, "are we going to be okay?" The question had nearly broken him. Not because she'd asked it, but because he wasn't sure of the answer. "We're going to figure it out, sweetheart," he'd replied, reaching across their small kitchen table to squeeze her hand. "Daddy's got a plan. Sometimes you have to take risks to make good things happen." Isabella had nodded solemnly, trusting him with the absolute faith that children reserved for their parents, the faith that assumed adults always knew what they were doing, always had everything under control. Now standing in the salvage yard, with Dutch waiting for his decision, Marcus wondered if he was about to betray that trust in the most spectacular way possible. The jet was a Cessna Citation, probably from the early 2000s based on its design, though the crash damage made positive identification difficult. It had been beautiful once, sleek and powerful, capable of carrying its passengers above the clouds at speeds that made the ground blur into abstract patterns. Now it looked like a monument to failure, a testament to dreams that had ended in twisted metal and shattered glass. Dutch sensed his hesitation and moved closer, his boots crunching on the scattered debris that littered the ground around the wreckage. "Look, son," he said, his voice taking on the tone of someone who'd seen too many desperate people make too many bad decisions. "I ain't gonna lie to you. Most of the time, buying crashed aircraft is throwing good money after bad. The valuable parts get damaged in the impact, the electronics get fried, the airframe gets compromised beyond repair. But sometimes, just sometimes, you get lucky." "What kind of lucky?" Marcus asked, though he already knew he was going to buy the plane regardless of Dutch's answer. He'd come too far, fallen too low, to turn back now. Dutch walked around to the rear of the aircraft, gesturing for Marcus to follow. The tail section had separated from the main fuselage during the crash, creating a gap that revealed the jet's internal structure. Inside, Marcus could see the complex web of wiring, hydraulic lines, and mechanical systems that had once made this machine capable of defying gravity. Engines might be salvageable, Dutch continued, pointing toward the turbofan units mounted beneath the wings. Those things are worth serious money if they're still in decent shape. Avionics suite could have valuable components. Navigation equipment, communication systems, autopilot computers. And sometimes, in the cargo compartments or passenger areas, you find personal items that the insurance companies wrote off, but the families still want back. Jewelry, documents, photographs. Stuff that's worthless to most people but priceless to the right person. Marcus nodded, understanding the subtext. Dutch was telling him that buying the wreckage was a long shot, but not an impossible one. In the aviation salvage business, fortunes were made and lost on exactly these kinds of gambles. The trick was knowing enough about aircraft systems to identify value where others saw only destruction. The paperwork took 20 minutes to complete. Dutch's office was a cluttered trailer, filled with filing cabinets, coffee-stained ledgers, and photographs of aircraft in various states of disassembly. The bill of sale was handwritten on a form that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s, but it was legal and binding. Marcus Rivera, purchaser. One Cessna Citation, tail number November 74 Delta 10, sold as is for $500 cash. As Marcus counted out the worn bills, Dutch offered one final piece of advice. Start with the easy stuff, he said. Anything that looks intact. Anything that doesn't require major disassembly. Get familiar with what you bought before you start tearing into the complicated systems. And remember, safety first. Crashed aircraft can have all kinds of hazards. Fuel residue, hydraulic fluid, sharp metal edges. Take your time and be careful. The drive back to the salvage yard the next morning felt like a journey to either salvation or ruin. Marcus had spent the previous evening researching citation specifications, studying maintenance manuals, and creating a mental inventory of potentially valuable components. Isabella had helped, her curious mind soaking up information about aircraft systems with the enthusiasm that only children could bring to learning. She'd asked intelligent questions about how jet engines worked, why planes needed so many different computers, what made some parts more valuable than others. The desert sunrise painted the salvage yard in shades of gold and amber as Marcus arrived with his borrowed pickup truck and a collection of basic tools. The wreckage looked different in the morning light, less ominous somehow, more like a puzzle waiting to be solved than a monument to disaster. He'd brought work gloves, safety glasses, a first aid kit, and a healthy respect for the dangers that Dutch had warned him about. He started with the exterior inspection, walking slowly around the aircraft and documenting the damage with his phone camera. The impact had been severe, but not catastrophic. The plane had apparently made a controlled crash landing rather than falling from altitude, which meant that many internal components might have survived intact. The landing gear was destroyed, the nose cone crumpled, both wings damaged but not completely severed. Most importantly, there was no evidence of fire damage, which would have destroyed the valuable electronic components. The passenger cabin was accessible through a door that hung askew on damaged hinges. Marcus forced it open carefully, mindful of sharp edges and unstable surfaces. The interior revealed the luxury that private jet travel represented, even in its current destroyed state. Leather seats, though torn and stained, showed the quality craftsmanship that wealthy passengers expected. Wood grain panels, now cracked and warped, had once provided an atmosphere of corporate sophistication. The carpet, despite being soaked and dried multiple times by desert weather, still showed traces of the deep blue color that had once complemented the aircraft's exterior paint scheme. Marcus worked methodically, documenting everything, looking for items that could be easily removed and potentially sold. The passenger seats were bolted down, but could be uninstalled with the right tools. The interior panels concealed wiring and components that might have value to aircraft restoration shops or maintenance facilities. Even the windows, if undamaged, could be worth hundreds of dollars each to someone restoring a similar aircraft. It was in the forward cargo compartment that Marcus made his first significant discovery. Hidden beneath a pile of water-damaged documents and personal belongings, he found a briefcase that had somehow survived the crash with minimal damage. The leather was scuffed and the metal clasps were bent, but the case was intact and, more importantly, locked. Marcus hesitated before touching it. Dutch had mentioned that crashed aircraft sometimes contained personal items that families wanted returned, and opening someone else's briefcase felt like a violation of privacy. But Dutch had also said that everything in the wreckage now belonged to Marcus, and the briefcase might contain documents that could help identify the plane's history or previous owners. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The case was heavier than he'd expected, suggesting it contained more than just papers. Marcus carried it outside into the bright desert sunlight and examined it more carefully. The leather was high quality, the kind of briefcase that expensive lawyers or corporate executives carry to important meetings. There was no name or identification visible on the exterior. No monogram or business card holder that might indicate ownership. Using a screwdriver and some careful leverage, Marcus managed to pop the damaged clasps without destroying the case entirely. Inside, cushioned by foam padding, were materials that made his heart race with possibility. Technical documents, engineering schematics, and what appeared to be prototype electronic components for some kind of advanced navigation system. The papers were printed on expensive letterhead from North Star Aerospace, a company Marcus recognized as one of the leading manufacturers of civilian aircraft navigation equipment. The documents were dated just 6 months earlier and marked with various levels of confidential classification. As Marcus read through them, his excitement grew. These weren't just random technical papers. They appeared to be development specifications for a revolutionary new autopilot system, something called the North Star Navigator Pro, designed to provide unprecedented levels of automated flight assistance for private aircraft. The prototype components matched the specifications in the documents. Circuit boards with integrated processors, sensor arrays, communication modules, all designed to work together as a complete navigation and automation package. According to the paperwork, this system was worth millions in development costs and represented years of research and engineering work. Marcus sat in the shade of the aircraft's damaged wing, reading through the technical specifications with growing amazement. The Navigator Pro wasn't just an improvement over existing autopilot systems. It was a quantum leap forward, incorporating artificial intelligence algorithms that could learn from pilot behavior, predict weather changes, optimize flight paths for fuel efficiency, and even make emergency landing decisions if the pilot became incapacitated. The implications were staggering. This technology could revolutionize private aviation, making it safer, more efficient, and more accessible to pilots with less experience. But more immediately relevant to Marcus's situation, these prototype components and development documents represented enormous value. Companies like Boeing, Airbus, or Lockheed Martin would pay significant sums for access to this kind of advanced technology. As Marcus continued reading, he discovered something even more intriguing. The briefcase contained correspondence between North Star Aerospace and the Department of Defense, discussing potential military applications for the Navigator Pro technology. The letters mentioned classified projects, government contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and timeline pressures that suggested the technology was being developed for critical national security applications. One document in particular caught his attention. A memorandum dated just 2 weeks before the plane crash, discussing concerns about corporate espionage and the need to protect the Navigator Pro specifications from foreign competitors. The memo mentioned that prototype units and development documents were being transported between facilities using private aircraft to maintain security, and that only a select few individuals had access to the complete system specifications. Marcus realized he was holding materials that had been lost in the crash and never recovered by North Star Aerospace. The insurance settlement had probably written off the briefcase and its contents as a total loss, but the technology itself was still valuable, still revolutionary, still capable of changing the aviation industry. The afternoon heat was becoming oppressive, but Marcus continued working through the aircraft, energized by his discovery. In the cockpit, he found additional components that matched the Navigator Pro specifications. Control interfaces, display units, and processing modules that had been installed for testing purposes. The crash damage had affected some of the equipment, but much of it appeared salvageable. As the sun began to set, painting the desert landscape in brilliant oranges and purples. Marcus loaded his truck with everything he'd found. The briefcase and its contents, the prototype navigation equipment, various aircraft components that could be sold for parts, and detailed photographs of everything that remained in the wreckage. It had been the most productive day he'd experienced in months, but he was also aware that he'd stumbled into something much larger and more complex than a simple salvage operation. The drive home gave him time to think about the implications of his discovery. The Navigator Pro technology was clearly valuable, but it also belonged to North Star Aerospace, a major corporation with significant resources and legal departments. Marcus couldn't simply sell the prototypes on the open market without risking serious legal consequences. But he also couldn't ignore the potential that this technology represented, both for the aviation industry and for his own desperate financial situation. Isabella was waiting for him when he arrived at their apartment. Her homework spread across the kitchen table, her blood glucose monitor and insulin supplies arranged in their usual precise order. She looked up from her math worksheets with the bright curiosity that always lifted his spirits, no matter how difficult the day had been. "How did it go, Daddy?" she asked, her eyes scanning his face for clues about their future. "Did you find anything good in the airplane?" Marcus sat down beside her, his mind still processing everything he'd discovered. "I found something interesting, sweetheart. Something that might be very important, but it's complicated. And I need to figure out the right thing to do with it." Isabella nodded seriously, her mature understanding once again reminding him how much responsibility she'd learned to carry despite her young age. "Is it something that could help us?" she asked quietly. "Maybe," Marcus replied, reaching over to help her with a particularly difficult math problem. "But first, I need to understand exactly what I've found and who it belongs to." Sometimes doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing. That night, after Isabella had gone to bed, Marcus spread the North Star documents across his kitchen table and began to really study what he'd discovered. The Navigator Pro wasn't just advanced technology. It was revolutionary technology that could save lives by preventing the kind of pilot error accidents that killed hundreds of people every year. The artificial intelligence algorithms could compensate for human mistakes, provide guidance in emergency situations, and even take control of aircraft when necessary to prevent crashes. But the technology was also incomplete. The documents indicated that North Star was still months away from finishing the development process, still working through complex technical challenges, still conducting test flights to validate the system's capabilities. The briefcase contained only part of the complete technology package, valuable certainly, but not sufficient to recreate the entire Navigator Pro system. As Marcus read deeper into the correspondence with the Department of Defense, he began to understand the broader context of what he'd found. The Navigator Pro technology was being developed not just for civilian aircraft, but for military drones, transport planes, and specialized aircraft used in combat situations. The Pentagon was investing heavily in autonomous flight systems that could operate in dangerous environments without risking human pilots. The implications were both exciting and troubling. This technology could indeed revolutionize aviation and save countless lives. But it was also being developed for military applications that Marcus, as a civilian, had no right to access or understand. The security clearances mentioned in the documents were far beyond anything he'd ever possessed, and the classified nature of some projects raised questions about national security that were completely outside his area of expertise. Marcus closed the documents and sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd stumbled into. He'd bought a crashed aircraft hoping to find salvageable parts worth a few $1,000s. Instead, he'd discovered technology worth millions, but technology that belonged to someone else and was connected to projects that might be vital to national security. The ethical implications were complex. Legally, he owned everything he'd found in the aircraft. The bill of sale from Dutch was clear and comprehensive. But morally, the situation was much more complicated. North Star Aerospace had lost valuable intellectual property in the crash. The Department of Defense had lost access to technology that might be critical to military operations. And families somewhere had probably lost loved ones when this plane went down. But Marcus also had responsibilities to Isabella, to their survival, to their future. The Navigator Pro technology represented an opportunity to escape the financial desperation that had been crushing them for months. Not through selling the prototypes, which would be illegal and wrong, but through understanding the technology well enough to contribute to its development in legitimate ways. Marcus had the technical knowledge to understand what he'd found. His years as an aircraft mechanic had given him deep familiarity with navigation systems, autopilot technology, and the integration challenges that made advanced avionics so complex. He could see where the Navigator Pro design was brilliant and where it might be improved. He could identify the technical challenges that Northstar was still working to solve. The question was whether he could find a way to use this knowledge ethically, legally, and in a manner that helped Isabella, while also serving the broader interests of aviation safety and national security. It would require careful thought, professional advice, and probably more courage than he'd ever needed before. As the desert night settled around their small apartment, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He would not sell the prototypes or attempt to profit directly from Northstar's lost technology. Instead, he would contact the company, return their property, and offer his services as a consultant who understood their system better than anyone except the original development team. It was a risky strategy. Northstar might simply take their technology back and offer nothing in return. They might even pursue legal action for possession of their property, regardless of how legitimately he'd acquired it. But it was also the right thing to do, and Marcus had learned from Isabella's courage in facing her medical challenges that doing the right thing was often the most important thing, even when it was also the most difficult. The next morning brought new challenges and new possibilities. Marcus called Northstar Aerospace's main number and spent 2 hours being transferred between departments, explaining his situation to skeptical receptionists and suspicious security personnel. Finally, he reached Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead engineer on the Navigator Pro project, who listened to his story with growing amazement and scheduled an emergency meeting for that afternoon. Dr. Chen arrived at the salvage yard, accompanied by 2 other Northstar engineers and a company security officer. She was a woman in her 40s with the intense focus of someone who lived and breathed cutting-edge technology. When Marcus showed her the briefcase and its contents, her reaction confirmed everything he'd suspected about the value of what he'd found. "This is 6 months of work," she said, her voice tight with emotion as she examined the prototype components. "We thought it was gone forever. The insurance company wrote it off as a total loss, and we've been rebuilding everything from backup files and earlier prototypes. Marcus, this technology could save thousands of lives once it's fully developed." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that came with such potential. "Dr. Chen," he said carefully, "I want to return everything to Northstar. But I also want to help finish what you started. I've studied these documents, and I think I understand challenges you're facing with the integration algorithms." Dr. Chen studied him with sharp intelligence, evaluating his technical knowledge through a series of probing questions about navigation systems, artificial intelligence programming, and the specific engineering challenges that the Navigator Pro represented. Her colleagues took notes and exchanged glances as Marcus demonstrated his understanding of concepts that most people outside the aerospace industry had never heard of. After an hour of technical discussion, Dr. Chen made Marcus an offer that would transform his life and Isabella's future. Northstar Aerospace wanted to hire him as a senior consultant on the Navigator Pro project, with a salary that would easily cover Isabella's medical expenses and provide financial security for their family. More importantly, they wanted his unique perspective as someone who understood the technology from the outside, who could see solutions that the original development team might have missed. The contract negotiations took 3 days, but the outcome exceeded Marcus's wildest hopes. He would work part-time from home, allowing him to maintain his involvement in Isabella's care while contributing to technology that could revolutionize aviation safety. The salary was more than he'd ever earned as an aircraft mechanic, and the health benefits package would ensure that Isabella had access to the best possible medical care. But the most satisfying aspect of the arrangement was the knowledge that his gamble, his desperate decision to risk his last $500 on a crashed aircraft, had led to something genuinely meaningful. The Navigator Pro technology would save lives by preventing accidents, assist pilots in emergency situations, and make aviation safer for everyone who flew in small aircraft. 6 months later, as Marcus watched Isabella demonstrate the science project she'd built about artificial intelligence in aviation, he reflected on the chain of events that had brought them to this point. His decision to buy the crashed jet had been driven by desperation, but it had led to discoveries that benefited not just his family, but the entire aviation community. The Navigator Pro system was now in final testing, incorporating improvements that Marcus had suggested based on his practical understanding of how pilots actually used navigation equipment. Dr. Chen had credited his contributions as essential to solving the integration challenges that had been blocking the project's completion. And Isabella, with her medical expenses covered by comprehensive insurance and her future secured by her father's new career, was thriving in ways that would have been impossible just months earlier. The crashed jet still sat in Dutch's salvage yard, stripped of its valuable components but serving as a reminder of how quickly life could change when people were willing to take calculated risks for the right reasons. Marcus had bought the wreckage hoping to find enough salvageable parts to keep his family afloat for a few more months. Instead, he'd found technology that would keep families safe in the skies for generations to come. Sometimes, as Dutch had said, what looks worthless on the outside contains something precious on the inside. You just have to be willing to dig for it, take the risk, and do the right thing when opportunity presents itself. For Marcus Rivera and his daughter Isabella, that willingness to dig deeper had changed everything. The following weeks transformed Marcus's small apartment into an unlikely research center. Technical manuals covered every surface, circuit diagrams were taped to walls, and the dining table had become a permanent workstation, where prototype components were carefully arranged alongside Isabella's homework assignments. The juxtaposition struck him as almost surreal. His daughter's math worksheets sharing space with million-dollar aerospace technology that could reshape the future of aviation. Dr. Chen had been true to her word about the consulting arrangement, but she'd also made it clear that North Star's expectations were extraordinarily high. The Navigator Pro project wasn't just another product development initiative. It represented the company's entire future in the autonomous flight market, with competitors from Silicon Valley to Shanghai racing to develop similar capabilities. Every day of delay meant losing ground to rivals who were equally determined to dominate this emerging technology sector. The pressure intensified when Marcus learned about North Star's primary competitor, a well-funded startup called Horizon Dynamics that had been making aggressive moves in the autonomous aviation space. Led by former NASA engineers and backed by venture capital firms with deep pockets, Horizon had been poaching talent from established aerospace companies and promising revolutionary breakthroughs that would make traditional navigation systems obsolete. Marcus discovered this competitive landscape during his first official meeting at North Star's headquarters, a gleaming complex of glass and steel buildings situated near the Phoenix airport. The facility buzzed with the energy of urgent innovation, where teams of engineers worked around the clock to solve technical challenges that had never been attempted before. Walking through the corridors, Marcus felt simultaneously inspired and intimidated by the scale of intellectual firepower focused on problems that he was now expected to help solve. Dr. Chen introduced him to the Core Navigator Pro team during a conference room meeting that felt more like a military briefing than a corporate presentation. The walls were covered with whiteboards filled with complex equations, system diagrams, and timeline charts that tracked progress against increasingly aggressive deadlines. The team members, all significantly younger than Marcus and armed with advanced degrees from prestigious universities, initially regarded him with polite skepticism. The skepticism evaporated when Marcus began analyzing the integration problems that had been stalling the project for months. His practical experience with aircraft systems allowed him to identify issues that the theoretical engineers had overlooked, gaps between elegant design concepts and the messy realities of how pilots actually operated their aircraft under stress. His suggestions weren't just technically sound, they were implementable with existing manufacturing processes and compatible with the regulatory requirements that governed aviation safety. Within a week, Marcus had earned the respect of engineers who initially questioned whether a salvage yard discovery could contribute meaningfully to cutting-edge aerospace development. His insights led to breakthrough solutions for sensor fusion algorithms, pilot interface design, and emergency response protocols that had been consuming months of development time without resolution. But the technical challenges were only part of the pressure Marcus faced. Isabella's medical needs required constant attention, and her diabetes management had become increasingly complex as she grew older and her body changed. The continuous glucose monitoring system that tracked her blood sugar levels throughout the day generated data that needed interpretation, adjustment of insulin dosages, and frequent consultation with her endocrinologist. Despite the improved insurance coverage that came with Marcus's North Star position, managing Isabella's condition remained a daily balancing act between medical necessity and normal childhood activities. The stress of these dual responsibilities began affecting Marcus in ways he hadn't anticipated. Sleep became elusive as his mind raced between aerospace engineering problems and worries about Isabella's long-term health outcomes. The consulting work, while financially rewarding, demanded mental energy that left him exhausted when Isabella needed help with homework or wanted to talk about her day at school. He found himself caught between two worlds, each making legitimate demands on his time and attention. Isabella, with the perceptive intelligence that had always characterized her approach to difficult situations, noticed her father's increasing tension. During one of their evening conversations, as Marcus helped her calculate the carbohydrate content of her dinner to determine the appropriate insulin dosage, she asked him directly about the changes she'd observed. "Daddy, you seem worried all the time now," she said, her voice carrying the gentle concern that children used when they sensed their parents were struggling. "Is the airplane work too hard? Are we going to be okay?" The question forced Marcus to confront the reality that his success at North Star, while solving their financial problems, had created new forms of stress that were affecting their family dynamic. He realized that he'd been so focused on proving himself capable of contributing to advanced aerospace development that he'd lost sight of the balance between professional achievement and personal well-being. That conversation led to a family meeting where Marcus and Isabella discussed how to manage their new circumstances more effectively. They established routines that protected time for homework help, medical care, and simple father-daughter activities that had nothing to do with aerospace engineering or diabetes management. Marcus learned to set boundaries around his consulting work, declining some projects and delegating others so that he could maintain his commitment to being present for Isabella's needs. The improved work-life balance actually enhanced Marcus's effectiveness as a Navigator Pro consultant. His mind was clearer, his problem-solving abilities sharper, and his creative insights more frequent when he wasn't constantly exhausted from trying to manage too many competing priorities. Dr. Chen noticed the change and commented that some of Marcus's most innovative contributions had come during periods when he appeared most relaxed and confident. This personal equilibrium was tested when North Star faced its most serious competitive threat yet. Intelligence reports indicated that Horizon Dynamics had somehow obtained detailed specifications for the Navigator Pro system and was using that information to accelerate their own development timeline. The leak appeared to come from inside North Star, suggesting corporate espionage at the highest levels of the organization. The revelation sent shockwaves through the company leadership and triggered a comprehensive security investigation that affected every employee with access to Navigator Pro technology. Marcus found himself subjected to detailed background checks, polygraph examinations, and interviews with federal investigators who specialized in industrial espionage cases. The experience was both humbling and terrifying, as he realized how easily his association with advanced aerospace technology could place him under suspicion. The investigation revealed that the security breach had occurred months before Marcus joined the project, eliminating him as a potential suspect but raising questions about other team members who had access to critical information. The atmosphere at North Star became tense and paranoid, with colleagues eyeing each other suspiciously and management implementing security protocols that made normal collaboration increasingly difficult. Dr. Chen confided to Marcus that the espionage investigation had damaged team morale and was threatening to derail the entire Navigator Pro project. Several key engineers had requested transfers to other programs, unwilling to work under the constant scrutiny and suspicion that now characterized the development environment. The technical challenges that remained were difficult enough without the added burden of internal security concerns. Marcus found himself in an unexpected position of influence as one of the few team members whose loyalty was beyond question, given the circumstances of how he'd joined the project. Dr. Chen began relying on him not just for technical insights, but for perspectives on how to rebuild team cohesion and maintain development momentum despite the challenging circumstances. The solution Marcus proposed drew on his experience as an aircraft mechanic, where trust and collaboration were essential for safety and efficiency. He suggested creating smaller, autonomous working groups that could make progress on specific technical challenges without requiring extensive coordination with the larger team. Each group would have clear responsibilities, defined objectives, and the authority to implement solutions without waiting for approval from higher management levels. This distributed approach to development proved remarkably effective. The smaller teams worked with renewed energy and creativity, freed from the bureaucratic constraints and security paranoia that had been stifling innovation. Marcus found himself leading one of these groups, focused on the emergency response algorithms that would allow the Navigator Pro system to take control of aircraft during crisis situations. The emergency response work was particularly meaningful to Marcus because it addressed the kind of catastrophic failures that had led to the crash where he'd originally found the Navigator Pro prototypes. By analyzing accident reports and pilot testimony from similar incidents, his team developed algorithms that could recognize developing emergency situations and provide assistance before they became unrecoverable disasters. The breakthrough came during a late-night brainstorming session when Marcus realized that the emergency response system needed to account for pilot psychology as well as aircraft systems. In crisis situations, pilots often made counterintuitive decisions based on panic, incomplete information, or training that didn't match the specific circumstances they faced. The Navigator Pro system could compensate for these human factors by providing clear, authoritative guidance that overrode confusion and helped pilots focus on the most critical actions. This insight led to the development of what the team called the Crisis Communication Protocol, a set of algorithms that could assess pilot stress levels through voice analysis, flight control inputs, and biometric data, then adjust its communication style to provide maximum effectiveness under specific emergency conditions. The system could be calm and reassuring for nervous pilots, firm and directive for panicked pilots, or detailed and technical for experienced pilots who needed comprehensive information to make informed decisions. The Crisis Communication Protocol became one of the Navigator Pro system's most innovative features, distinguishing it from competing products that focused solely on automated flight control without considering the human elements of emergency response. Aviation safety experts who reviewed the system praised its sophisticated understanding of pilot psychology and its potential to prevent accidents caused by human error under stress. But the success of Marcus's technical contributions was overshadowed by escalating corporate warfare between North Star and Horizon Dynamics. The espionage investigation had revealed that Horizon had not only stolen Navigator Pro specifications, but had also been systematically recruiting North Star employees and attempting to undermine the company's relationships with government contractors and civilian customers. The situation reached a crisis point when Horizon announced that they would be demonstrating their own autonomous flight system, called SkyGuide, at the upcoming International Aviation Technology Conference. The demonstration was scheduled just 2 weeks before North Star planned to unveil the completed Navigator Pro system, creating a public relations nightmare that threatened to position North Star as a follower rather than an innovator in the autonomous aviation market. Dr. Chen called an emergency meeting of the entire Navigator Pro team to discuss how to respond to Horizon's aggressive competitive tactics. The atmosphere in the conference room was tense, with team members expressing frustration, anger, and concern about the implications of being upstaged by a competitor using stolen technology. Marcus listened to the various proposals for accelerating the Navigator Pro timeline, increasing marketing efforts, or pursuing legal action against Horizon for intellectual property theft. But as the discussion continued, he began to see the situation from a different perspective, one informed by his experience as a salvage operator who understood that value didn't always come from being first to market. When Dr. Chen asked for his input, Marcus stood up and addressed the room with the quiet confidence he'd developed through months of successful problem-solving. Instead of trying to beat Horizon to market with a rushed product, he suggested, North Star should focus on demonstrating something that Horizon couldn't match, even with stolen specifications. The Navigator Pro system's real advantage wasn't just its technical capabilities, Marcus explained, but its integration of human factors research, practical aviation experience, and safety-focused design philosophy. Horizon might have copied the algorithms and hardware specifications, but they couldn't replicate the deep understanding of pilot needs and aircraft operations that had shaped the Navigator Pro development process. Marcus proposed that North Star's demonstration should focus on real-world scenarios that highlighted these human-centered design advantages. Instead of showing the system working perfectly under ideal conditions, they should demonstrate how it performed during actual emergency situations, with real pilots facing genuine stress and uncertainty. The proposal was ambitious and risky. It would require recruiting experienced pilots willing to participate in simulated emergency scenarios, obtaining regulatory approval for demonstration flights that involved intentional system failures, and coordinating with aviation safety authorities who were naturally cautious about any technology that claimed to improve emergency response capabilities. But the proposal also offered Northstar an opportunity to differentiate itself in ways that couldn't be easily copied or undermined by competitors. The human factors research that had informed the Navigator Pro development represented years of work that couldn't be replicated quickly, even by well-funded competitors with access to stolen specifications. Dr. Chen embraced the concept immediately, recognizing that it aligned with Northstar's core values and technical strengths. The company had always prioritized safety and practical applicability over pure technological advancement, and Marcus's proposal offered a way to showcase these priorities in a compelling and memorable demonstration. The preparation for the demonstration consumed the next month of intensive work. Marcus found himself coordinating with test pilots, aviation safety experts, and regulatory officials who needed to approve every aspect of the planned emergency scenarios. The complexity of the logistics rivaled the technical challenges of developing the Navigator Pro system itself. Isabella became an unofficial project assistant, helping Marcus organize his documentation, reminding him about important deadlines, and providing the kind of moral support that only family members could offer during periods of intense professional pressure. Her diabetes management had stabilized under the improved medical care that Marcus's Northstar position provided, allowing her to focus more energy on school activities and normal childhood interests. The father-daughter team developed a routine where Isabella would help Marcus review his presentation materials each evening, asking questions that forced him to explain complex technical concepts in simple terms. This process not only helped Marcus refine his communication skills, but also gave Isabella a sophisticated understanding of aerospace technology that impressed her teachers and classmates. 3 days before the Aviation Technology Conference, Marcus received news that changed everything about the upcoming demonstration. Federal investigators had arrested 2 Horizon Dynamics executives on charges of industrial espionage, conspiracy, and violation of defense contracting regulations. The evidence suggested that Horizon's entire autonomous flight program had been built on stolen intellectual property from multiple companies, not just Northstar. The arrests vindicated Northstar's security concerns and validated the company's decision to pursue legal action against Horizon. But they also created a new challenge for the Navigator Pro demonstration, since the elimination of Horizon as a competitive threat reduced the urgency of proving Northstar's technological superiority. Dr. Chen decided to proceed with the demonstration as planned, but with a modified focus that emphasized the Navigator Pro system's potential benefits for aviation safety rather than its competitive advantages over stolen technology. The demonstration would showcase how the system could prevent accidents, assist pilots during emergencies, and improve the overall safety record of general aviation. Marcus spent the final preparation days refining the emergency scenarios that would be demonstrated, working with test pilots to ensure that the simulated crises were realistic but manageable. The scenarios included engine failures, weather emergencies, navigation system malfunctions, and pilot incapacitation situations that represented the most common causes of general aviation accidents. Each scenario was designed to highlight specific Navigator Pro capabilities while demonstrating the system's human-centered approach to emergency assistance. The crisis communication protocol would adapt its guidance style to each pilot's experience level and stress response, while the automated flight controls would provide precisely the level of assistance needed to maintain safety without undermining pilot authority. The night before the demonstration, Marcus sat in his hotel room reviewing the presentation materials one final time. Isabella had accompanied him to the conference, her first major trip outside Arizona, and she was sleeping peacefully in the adjoining room after a day of exploring the aerospace exhibits and meeting the pilots who would participate in the demonstration. Looking at his daughter's peaceful face, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Less than a year ago, he'd been a desperate single father risking his last $500 on a crashed aircraft, hoping to find enough salvageable parts to keep his family afloat for a few more weeks. Now he was preparing to demonstrate technology that could save thousands of lives and revolutionize the aviation industry. The transformation hadn't been easy or predictable. It had required taking enormous risks, working harder than he'd ever worked before, and learning to balance professional ambitions with family responsibilities in ways he'd never previously considered. But it had also provided Isabella with medical security, given Marcus a career that utilized his skills and knowledge in meaningful ways, and contributed to technological advances that would benefit countless other families. As Marcus prepared for sleep, he thought about the crashed Cessna Citation that still sat in Dutch's salvage yard, stripped of its valuable components, but serving as a permanent reminder of how dramatically life could change when people were willing to take calculated risks for the right reasons. Tomorrow's demonstration would validate all the work, worry, and hope that had grown from that initial $500 gamble. The morning of the demonstration dawned clear and bright, with perfect weather conditions for the test flights that would showcase the Navigator Pro system's capabilities. The Aviation Technology Conference had attracted hundreds of attendees from around the world, including airline executives, government officials, aviation safety experts, and journalists who covered the aerospace industry. Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as he prepared for what would be the most important presentation of his career. Everything he and the North Star team had worked toward over the past months would be evaluated by an audience that included some of the most knowledgeable and influential people in aviation. But as he looked out at the assembled crowd and thought about Isabella watching from the VIP section, Marcus realized that the demonstration represented something more significant than professional achievement or corporate success. It represented the transformation of desperate circumstances into meaningful contribution, the conversion of personal crisis into technological advancement that would serve the broader good. The Navigator Pro system had grown from the wreckage of tragedy into technology that could prevent other tragedies. Marcus's journey from salvage yard gambler to aerospace consultant had proven that expertise could emerge from unexpected places, that practical experience could complement academic knowledge, and that the most valuable innovations often came from understanding real human needs rather than pursuing theoretical perfection. As the first test aircraft took off to begin the demonstration, Marcus knew that regardless of how the audience responded to the Navigator Pro system, he and Isabella had already achieved something extraordinary. They had survived their crisis, found their new path, and contributed to something larger than themselves. The rest would be determined by factors beyond their control, but their fundamental success was already secure. The demonstration aircraft climbed smoothly into the morning sky, its engines creating a steady rhythm that resonated through the crowd of aviation professionals gathered at the conference airfield. Marcus stood at the presentation podium, wireless microphone clipped to his shirt, watching the live video feed from the cockpit, as test pilot Captain Rebecca Martinez began the first of 5 carefully planned emergency scenarios. Captain Martinez was a former Air Force instructor with over 20 years of flight experience, chosen specifically for her ability to maintain composure under pressure while articulating her decision-making process for the audience. The Navigator Pro system had been integrated into her aircraft's existing avionics suite, creating a seamless interface that appeared as natural extensions of traditional flight instruments rather than intrusive additions to the cockpit environment. The first scenario began without warning. As designed, the aircraft's primary navigation system suddenly failed, displaying error messages and conflicting information that would typically force a pilot to rely on backup instruments and radio navigation aids. In older aircraft, this kind of failure could quickly escalate into a life-threatening emergency if the pilot became disoriented or lost situational awareness. Marcus watched the audience lean forward as Captain Martinez's voice came through the speakers, describing her immediate assessment of the situation. The Navigator Pro system's response was subtle but immediate, providing alternative navigation solutions while analyzing the pilot's stress indicators to determine the most effective communication approach. Rather than overwhelming Captain Martinez with technical data, the system offered clear, prioritized guidance that built on her existing training and experience. It confirmed her position using satellite data, suggested the nearest suitable airports for emergency landing, and provided weather information that would affect her routing decisions. Most importantly, it maintained her authority as pilot in command while offering assistance that enhanced rather than replaced her judgment. The audience of aviation experts could see the psychological elements of the system's design, as Captain Martinez's voice remained steady and confident throughout the scenario. Traditional automated systems often created additional stress by providing information in formats that required interpretation under pressure. The Navigator Pro system presented data in intuitive formats that supported natural pilot decision-making processes. Dr. Chen stood beside Marcus at the podium, providing technical commentary that explained the sophisticated algorithms running behind the seemingly simple interface. The system was simultaneously processing aircraft performance data, weather patterns, air traffic control communications, and pilot biometric information to create a comprehensive understanding of the developing situation. The second scenario introduced a more complex challenge, simulating partial engine failure that required immediate power reduction and careful flight path management to reach a suitable landing site. This type of emergency tested both pilot skill and aircraft performance, often leaving little margin for error in decision-making or execution. Captain Martinez's response demonstrated how the Navigator Pro system could assist without undermining pilot authority. As she began the engine failure checklist, the system automatically calculated optimal glide ratios, identified reachable airports, and prepared emergency frequency communications. But it presented this information as suggestions rather than commands, allowing Captain Martinez to maintain her role as the final decision-maker. The audience watched as the system adapted its communication style to match Captain Martinez's increasing workload. During high-stress phases of the emergency procedure, it provided only critical information in concise formats. When she had more mental capacity available, it offered additional options and explanatory details that supported more sophisticated decision-making. Marcus felt his confidence growing as he observed the audience's reactions. Aviation safety experts were taking detailed notes, airline executives were asking technical questions, and government officials were discussing potential applications for military and commercial aircraft. The demonstration was achieving exactly what he'd hoped, showcasing the Navigator Pro system's human-centered design philosophy in ways that distinguished it from purely automated competitors. The third scenario tested the system's ability to assist with weather-related emergencies, simulating encounter with severe turbulence and embedded thunderstorms that could overwhelm inexperienced pilots. Weather-related accidents remained one of the leading causes of general aviation fatalities, often occurring when pilots continued flights into deteriorating conditions that exceeded their skill or aircraft capabilities. As Captain Martinez encountered the simulated weather emergency, the Navigator Pro system demonstrated its integration with advanced meteorological data sources. Rather than simply displaying weather radar information, it analyzed storm movement patterns, turbulence reports from other aircraft, and historical weather data to predict the safest routing options through or around the severe weather area. The system's crisis communication protocols adapted to the rapidly changing situation, providing updated guidance as weather conditions evolved. It prioritized pilot workload management, offering simplified routing suggestions during periods of severe turbulence, while providing more detailed analysis when flight conditions allowed for comprehensive planning. Dr. Chen explained to the audience how the system's weather analysis capabilities had been developed through partnerships with the National Weather Service and commercial meteorological companies. The algorithms incorporated lessons learned from accident investigations, pilot interviews, and atmospheric research that went far beyond traditional weather avoidance systems. The fourth scenario addressed one of aviation's most challenging emergencies: pilot incapacitation during flight. This situation tested the Navigator Pro system's ability to assume primary flight control while communicating with air traffic control and passengers to coordinate emergency response on the ground. For this demonstration, Captain Martinez simulated gradual incapacitation rather than sudden unconsciousness, allowing the audience to observe how the system recognized subtle changes in pilot behavior and gradually increased its level of assistance. The system monitored voice patterns, flight control inputs, and response times to identify developing problems before they became critical emergencies. As the simulated incapacitation progressed, the Navigator Pro system smoothly transitioned from advisory to control functions, maintaining aircraft stability while transmitting emergency communications to air traffic control. The system's voice synthesis capabilities allowed it to provide clear, professional communications that conveyed the nature of the emergency and requested appropriate assistance from ground personnel. The demonstration showed how the system could maintain passenger safety and comfort during such emergencies, providing cabin announcements that were calm and informative without creating panic. The integration with aircraft systems allowed it to monitor cabin pressure, temperature, and other environmental factors that could affect passenger well-being during extended emergencies. The final scenario tested the Navigator Pro system's learning capabilities, simulating a complex emergency that combined multiple system failures with challenging weather conditions. This type of compound emergency often overwhelmed pilots in traditional automated systems, leading to accidents even when individual problems might have been manageable separately. Captain Martinez's response to the compound emergency demonstrated how the system's artificial intelligence algorithms could prioritize multiple competing demands on pilot attention. Rather than presenting all available information simultaneously, the system sequenced its guidance to match the logical flow of emergency procedures while adapting to changing priorities as the situation evolved. The audience watched as the system coordinated between different emergency checklists, weather avoidance procedures, and air traffic control requirements to create a coherent response plan that addressed all aspects of the developing crisis. The integration was seamless, appearing as natural extensions of Captain Martinez's own problem-solving process rather than external interference with her decision-making authority. As the demonstration aircraft returned to the airfield for a successful landing after completing all 5 emergency scenarios, the audience erupted in spontaneous applause. Aviation professionals who had witnessed countless technology demonstrations recognized that they had seen something genuinely revolutionary, a system that addressed fundamental limitations in how humans and machines collaborated during crisis situations. Marcus felt a surge of emotion as he watched Isabella's proud smile from the VIP section. His daughter had witnessed the culmination of their journey from desperation to achievement, from salvage yard gambling to aerospace innovation. The technology that had emerged from a crashed aircraft had been transformed into a system that could prevent other crashes, save other families from experiencing similar tragedies. Dr. Chen took the microphone to field questions from the audience, and the depth and sophistication of the inquiries confirmed that the demonstration had achieved its objectives. Airlines wanted to know about certification timelines for commercial applications. Military officials asked about security features and classified applications. General aviation organizations inquired about cost and availability for smaller aircraft operators. The questions continued for over an hour, covering technical specifications, regulatory requirements, manufacturing capabilities, and implementation strategies. Each answer demonstrated the thoroughness of the Navigator Pro development process and the practical applicability of the system across a wide range of aviation sectors. When the formal presentation concluded, Marcus found himself surrounded by conference attendees who wanted to discuss specific aspects of the system's design and capabilities. The conversations ranged from technical details about sensor integration to philosophical discussions about the appropriate balance between human judgment and machine assistance in critical situations. One conversation particularly struck Marcus as significant. Dr. William Foster, Director of Aviation Safety Research at the Federal Aviation Administration, pulled him aside to discuss the potential impact of the Navigator Pro system on general aviation accident rates. Dr. Foster had spent decades studying aviation accidents and understood better than most people how technology could either contribute to or prevent catastrophic failures. The human factors approach you've incorporated addresses the root causes of most general aviation accidents, Dr. Foster explained. Pilot error, weather-related poor decision-making, loss of situational awareness during emergencies. Traditional automation often makes these problems worse by adding complexity or reducing pilot engagement. Your system appears to enhance human capabilities rather than replacing them. Marcus nodded, understanding that Dr. Foster's endorsement carried significant weight within the aviation regulatory community. The FAA's support would be crucial for obtaining the certifications necessary to bring the Navigator Pro system to market, and Dr. Foster's positive assessment suggested that regulatory approval might be more straightforward than originally anticipated. The conversation with Dr. Foster also highlighted something that Marcus had begun to understand about his role in the Navigator Pro development process. His practical experience as an aircraft mechanic had provided perspectives that pure research and development couldn't replicate. He understood how pilots actually used aircraft systems under stress, how maintenance procedures affected system reliability, and how real-world operating conditions differed from laboratory testing environments. This practical knowledge had shaped the Navigator Pro system in ways that made it more robust, more user-friendly, and more likely to perform reliably in the challenging environments where it would actually be used. The academic engineers on the development team had provided theoretical frameworks and advanced algorithms, but Marcus had contributed the practical wisdom that transformed theoretical concepts into workable solutions. As the conference day concluded and attendees began departing, Marcus received news that validated everything they had worked toward. 3 major airlines had submitted letters of intent to purchase Navigator Pro systems for their regional aircraft fleets, contingent on successful completion of certification testing. 2 government agencies had requested briefings about potential military applications. And most significantly, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association had announced plans to advocate for expedited regulatory approval based on the system's demonstrated safety benefits. The commercial interest in the Navigator Pro system created new opportunities and new responsibilities for Marcus. Northstar Aerospace offered him a permanent position as Director of Human Factors Engineering, with a substantial salary increase and equity participation that would provide long-term financial security for his family. The position would involve overseeing the integration of human factors research into all of Northstar's future products, ensuring that the company's technology development remained focused on enhancing rather than replacing human capabilities. Marcus accepted the position immediately, recognizing that it represented not just career advancement, but the opportunity to influence how aviation technology was developed across the industry. His experience with the Navigator Pro project had demonstrated the value of incorporating practical operational knowledge into advanced technology development, and Northstar wanted to institutionalize this approach across all their product lines. The new position also provided Isabella with educational opportunities that Marcus had never imagined possible. Northstar's headquarters were located near several excellent schools with specialized programs for gifted students, and the company's comprehensive healthcare benefits would ensure that Isabella had access to the most advanced diabetes management technologies as they became available. More importantly, the stability and success that came with Marcus's new career allowed Isabella to pursue her own interests without the constant anxiety about family finances that had characterized her early childhood. She enrolled in advanced mathematics and science programs, joined the school robotics team, and began exploring her own interests in aerospace engineering with the confidence that came from knowing her medical needs were secured and her future possibilities were unlimited. The transformation in their family dynamic was as significant as the change in their financial circumstances. Marcus no longer worked multiple jobs or worried constantly about medical bills and basic expenses. Isabella no longer carried the psychological burden of knowing that her medical condition created financial stress for her father. They could focus on normal family activities, educational opportunities, and long-term planning without the constant pressure of immediate survival needs. 6 months after the successful Navigator Pro demonstration, Marcus received a call that brought their journey full circle. Dutch, the salvage yard owner who had sold him the crashed Cessna Citation, had been following news coverage of the Navigator Pro system and wanted to congratulate Marcus on his success. The conversation with Dutch reminded Marcus of how far he had traveled from that desperate morning when he had risked his last $500 on a piece of twisted metal in the Arizona desert. The crashed aircraft had contained not just valuable technology, but the seeds of a completely transformed life for him and Isabella. Dutch also shared news that added another layer of meaning to Marcus's story. The original crash that had destroyed the Cessna Citation had been caused by a navigation system failure during a thunderstorm, exactly the type of emergency that the Navigator Pro system was designed to prevent. The aircraft had been carrying a Northstar engineering team returning from a testing flight when the accident occurred, which explained why the prototype equipment and classified documents had been on board. Learning about the original crash victims gave Marcus a deeper understanding of the responsibility that came with developing safety technology. The Navigator Pro system represented not just commercial opportunity or technical achievement, but a tribute to the engineers who had died in the crash and a commitment to preventing similar tragedies in the future. The story of those lost engineers also connected Marcus to the broader community of people who dedicated their careers to aviation safety. He began corresponding with the families of the crash victims, sharing how their loved ones' work had continued through the Navigator Pro development and would ultimately save lives through improved emergency response capabilities. These conversations led to Marcus establishing a scholarship fund in memory of the engineers who had died in the crash. The fund would support students pursuing careers in aviation safety research, ensuring that the next generation of engineers would continue the work of developing technology that prioritized human life over corporate profits or technical elegance. Isabella participated in the scholarship fund activities, helping to review applications and interview candidates who shared her father's commitment to using technology for humanitarian purposes. Her involvement gave her exposure to advanced academic and professional opportunities, while reinforcing the values that had guided their family through their transformation from desperation to success. The scholarship fund also connected Marcus to other families who had been affected by aviation accidents, creating a network of mutual support and shared advocacy for improved safety technologies. These relationships reminded him that the Navigator Pro system's value extended far beyond its commercial success to its potential for preventing the kind of personal tragedies that he and Isabella had experienced in different contexts. As Marcus reflected on their journey from the crashed jet discovery to their current success, he understood that the most significant transformation had been internal rather than external. The financial security and professional recognition were meaningful, But the deeper change involved his understanding of how individual actions could contribute to broader social benefits. The desperate gamble of spending his last $500 on aircraft salvage had been motivated by immediate survival needs. But that decision had led to discoveries and developments that would benefit thousands of other families facing similar challenges. The connection between personal crisis and social contribution had given new meaning to both their struggles and their success. Isabella's medical condition, which had once seemed like an insurmountable burden, had become a source of perspective and motivation that influenced how Marcus approached technology development. Her courage in facing daily medical challenges had inspired his commitment to developing technology that could help other people facing their own life-threatening situations. The Navigator Pro system's success had also validated Marcus's belief that expertise could emerge from unexpected sources, and that practical experience could complement academic knowledge in powerful ways. His background as an aircraft mechanic had provided insights that PhD engineers had missed, demonstrating that innovation often required diverse perspectives and interdisciplinary collaboration. The system's human-centered design philosophy had been influenced by Isabella's needs as much as by aviation safety research. Marcus had learned to prioritize user experience and psychological factors through his daily experience of managing his daughter's medical technology, and these insights had shaped how the Navigator Pro system interacted with pilots under stress. As Marcus prepared for the next phase of his career at North Star, he carried forward the lessons learned from their transformation journey. Success required not just technical competence but also courage to take calculated risks, persistence through challenging circumstances, and commitment to using individual talents for broader social benefit. The crashed jet that had changed their lives remained in Dutch's salvage yard, now stripped of its valuable components, but serving as a reminder of how dramatically life could change when people were willing to look beyond surface appearances to discover hidden potential. The wreckage that had once represented someone else's tragedy had become the foundation for preventing future tragedies through improved aviation safety technology. Isabella, now thriving academically and medically, often visited the salvage yard with Marcus to see the aircraft that had transformed their lives. She understood better than most people how quickly circumstances could change and how important it was to maintain perspective during both difficult and successful periods. Their story had become part of North Star's corporate culture, inspiring other employees to think creatively about problem-solving and to consider how their work could contribute to humanitarian goals beyond commercial success. The Navigator Pro project had demonstrated that the most innovative solutions often emerged from the intersection of technical expertise and real-world experience with the problems being addressed. The aviation industry had taken notice of the human factors approach that Marcus had brought to technology development, and other companies were beginning to incorporate similar methodologies into their own research and development processes. The success of the Navigator Pro system had validated the importance of understanding user needs and operational realities during the design phase, rather than attempting to address these factors after development was complete. Marcus's rise from desperate single father to respected aerospace engineer had also inspired other parents facing similar challenges with children's medical conditions. His story demonstrated that crisis situations, while painful and frightening, could also create opportunities for growth and contribution that might never have emerged under normal circumstances. The financial security that came with his success at North Star allowed Marcus to support other families dealing with similar challenges, both through direct assistance and through advocacy for improved insurance coverage and medical technology access. The transformation in his own circumstances had created a sense of responsibility to help others facing comparable difficulties. As Isabella entered her teenage years with her diabetes well managed and her future filled with possibilities, Marcus reflected on how their journey had validated the importance of persistence, creativity, and willingness to take calculated risks in pursuit of meaningful goals. The $500 gamble that had started their transformation had required courage, but it had also required the wisdom to recognize opportunity hidden within apparent disaster. The Navigator Pro system continued to evolve and improve, incorporating feedback from pilots, safety researchers, and regulatory officials who understood the critical importance of aviation safety technology. Marcus's role in its ongoing development ensured that the system remained focused on enhancing human capabilities rather than replacing human judgment, maintaining the philosophical approach that had made the original demonstration so compelling. Their story had come full circle, from crisis to discovery to contribution, creating ripple effects that extended far beyond their own family to influence aviation safety technology development and inspire other families facing similar challenges. The crashed jet had indeed changed everything, but the most profound changes had been in their understanding of how individual actions could contribute to broader social benefits, and how apparent disasters could contain the seeds of future success. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.